Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love Well podcast. My name is Anna.
And my name is Marlen.
And we are diving in today to episode 2. We're going to be talking about all things immigration. So, what does it mean to be an immigrant? Addressing some misconceptions, also hearing from Marlen and some of her experiences with this. So, I'm excited to be able to talk about this. Marlen, how do you feel?
I am excited to bring more clarity, I guess, a little bit more understanding. I'm also nervous because I feel, again, a little bit of the responsibility to just deliver this well.
Right.
Hopefully, I don't miss out on a lot, but again, we're not going to be able to cover every single little thing, but hopefully we're able to cover enough where you have a better understanding and hear from my firsthand experience of immigrating here and going through the immigration process. Because I know even people that do have an idea, I have heard that this is maybe what happens, but hearing more like, someone that has gone through, that is still going through the immigration process. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's good just to note, if you guys didn't listen to our intro about immigration and why we decided to discuss that firsthand on this podcast, if you go back and listen to it, we mentioned that it's definitely something that we are all learning, and we're all trying to take on a posture of humility with this. So even myself, I mean, we've been friends for 4-5 years almost, and just I continually ask questions. And I think that was one of the things was we mentioned just coming with this topic and with this conversation with a stance of curiosity more so than assumption, I think is the best thing that we can do here. Yeah. But also, I mean, as we were going through the outline for this episode, just having questions in my head pop up of, okay, so what does that look like? And I'll be asking some of those because I think it's very fair for a lot of people to not feel shy enough to ask. Or I think just having an open space really does help.
For sure.
Not only educate, but also just help us as human beings love each other in a better way. So
yeah, you nailed it on that. So if you want, let's dive in.
Let's get
into it, guys. Okay, so what does it really mean to be an immigrant? And I'm going to read this because it's a definition, and I want it to be clear. It's not things that I'm making up, but it's just, what is. So simply put, an immigrant is a person living in a country other than that of his or her birth. Within the definition, we have different statuses of immigrants. And we have what is a lawful permanent resident, which you will commonly know as a green card holder. Someone that has a green card, green card is like something that you can hear commonly in movies and just green card, the green card.
Right.
Temporary visitor status, which means that someone is able to enter the country for a specific amount of time. This varies from like months to years, but people have to stay within that.
Right.
Then we have undocumented immigrant status, which this is the one that usually becomes highly politicized and people get into big debates about this type of status. And a United States citizen status, which after an immigrant has lived a determined amount of time, depending on where you are in the immigration process or how many years you've lived in the U.S., you are able to petition to become a U.S. Citizen, which I became a U.S. citizen last year in April. So nice. I fall into that category. At first, I was within the first category for almost 5 years, I was a lawful permanent resident. So I had a green card.
Okay.
And then after finishing that time that I was required legally to be able to petition to become a citizen, then last year that happened. And then when we talk about immigration, I know that some people confuse, well, what's the difference between an immigrant and a refugee?
Right.
So a refugee is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disasters. So an immigrant willingly comes to the country that they want to come to, and the refugee is someone that has been forced. say that more immigrants than you think actually fall into this refugee category, but because of how it's designed, they don't fall into that.
Okay.
But I also wanted to say something that for the longest time, I think it's been hurtful to the immigrant community, and that is using, because, language matters. The words that we say matter. How we address people and talk about people matter. Nice. And I love that last episode you talk about the dignity of people. And I think one of those words that has been hurtful in the past is like referring to specifically undocumented immigrants as illegals. Right. And the correct way to address these people is undocumented. Because when we talk about and say someone, oh yeah, they're the illegals, I have heard that say, oh yeah, they're illegal.
They're illegal, right, yeah.
And when we say like they're illegal, it's almost a saying that it's part of their identity, while having papers, like as people say, documentation is not part of someone's identity. So I just wanted to name that because I think it has been shared before. I've seen it, like people have had some of these conversations, but really just like changing that, because it's been a word that has been normalized. It just is. And it's okay. I don't want to say it from a shame or shame you or say like, if you say illegals, like you're just wrong. No, it's just more like, hey, let's be aware.
Yeah.
Now 100%. That you know, like, oh, using the term illegal is not dignifying to the people I'm referring to. But I can say they're undocumented or documented.
I think that's super helpful. I think that is, one of those things, like you said, language matters, and it's something that is important to point out. So I'm glad you put that in there. So what are some other like misconceptions that you've seen with just conversations with people?
Yeah. There's been quite a few, but I think one that consistently stands out is when people say get in line or getting in line, or why don't people just get in line? Like so, and I wanted to ask you, because I wanted to ask you, and maybe for you who are listening, I want you to think about this. Like, when you hear that phrase, what comes to mind? Or what are some of the things that you heard growing up or heard on the news or saw on social media? So what was that?
I think that's super fair to ask. I will be completely honest.
Love it.
I feel like there's definitely not a ton of knowledge that I've learned. It's just kind of, again, what I assumed.
Yeah.
And I think based on my experience, it was like, oh, well, that's just going to be similar to their experience, right? Because I think, like we said in another episode, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think when we don't know certain things, our instinct is to just relate it to what we know.
Yeah.
Right? Like to just say like, oh, well, this is how I've experienced things in this realm. So it has to be the same way for them, or it has to be the same way for her or him or whatever. And so I think, if I'm being honest, I definitely thought it was more of a paperwork process that, would almost be similar to going to the DMV. I know that sounds so bad, but almost, going to renew paperwork or get a visa. Because we both traveled a lot, and the temporary visa, like you're talking about, depending on what country, you can pay for a visa. You can have to, do the paperwork for a visa. There's different processes, but I kind of always just, I guess, generalized it as okay. Well, this would be like you moving from one address to another, and now you're needing to change your address, which I now know is not correct. I'm just putting it out there for everyone out there.
Thank you so much for just saying that, because I think it's hard. I know it's hard for me to admit that I don't know something, and just like it's easier to pretend like, oh yeah, I know. But just the reality of like, hey, this is what I thought.
Right.
And I think it will be powerful to so many listening to be like, oh, and maybe right now you're thinking about, oh wait, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. But now that I'm thinking about it,
exactly.
maybe think about what you thought, that when you read or hear or hear someone say or share, like, oh yeah, why don't they just get in line, you know? And I see this and I hear this, and my body just goes into like, okay, let's talk about it.
Right.
What does getting in line mean? But before I do get more into the specifics of this, I do want to say, and I think you said it as well, every story is different. Like, I'm going to share, you're going to get a deeper understanding of my process, but there are processes, and I have friends and family in different processes that are different to mine, like so different. So knowing that the immigration experience is not a monolith. There's so many different things, many different ways that it affects each person that is trying to immigrate through the legal pathway. So now let's go into it. So what are the things when I hear, did you want to say?
One thing I was just going to say is, and this is why we're doing this conversation.
Yeah.
Because it is easy to have misconceptions. And I think, like, when we met on the coffee shop to talk about this stuff, I mean, that was literally where I think it was the most eye-opening. What she's about to share with her story and her brother's story, that was the most eye-opening, because I think it is easy to just assume, like we're saying, you know, oh, why don't you just get in line? Like, it's simple, it's easy.
Yeah.
But when you get into the layers of what this actually looks like, I mean, it is very complex. It is. And I think one thing in the States, at least, I don't know where you guys are tuning in from, but it is so common for us to just make things black and white, and for us to just generalize and say, well, this is this and this is that. It is. No, it really is. And so I think it's great that, you know, Marlen's able to share this with us. And also, for those that already know this, I mean, even more reason for you to share that with other people that might not understand this as well.
Yeah. So let's get into what getting in line means. I think one of the things that people don't know is that you need sponsors. And there's different types of sponsors. So I'll share first from my personal experience. So my husband is a U.S. citizen. He was born and raised here in the U.S. So when he went to Honduras and we met there, dated for 2.5 years. Then when we knew that we were serious and we're like, okay, we're going to get married, we had no clue even where to start.
Oh, yeah.
We had no clue. And then we're like, okay, we started looking online. What does it entail? And one of the first things is like, you need a sponsor and you need a lawyer. So John's dad actually started looking for, you know, recommendations. And let me tell you also, finding a good immigration lawyer is hard. Someone that knows what they're doing. I also know and have friends who have been scammed by lawyers and they've taken thousands of dollars. Oh, so man. Just think about that a little bit. That would, it's hard to find someone that is trustworthy and also like that knows what they're doing.
Right.
So as we started looking for a lawyer, okay, what does it mean to really petition? What does it mean for me to, you know, go through this legal pathway of moving to the U.S.?
Right.
We found out that we needed a sponsor. So sponsors can happen multiple ways. One, it can be a personal sponsor through family. So in this case, my husband, John, at the time, I also want to give more context. We had just turned 21 when we got engaged. I know we were babies.
Oh my goodness.
We were babies. I know we got engaged at 21 years old. But we had both just become, we were both finishing college. So we didn't have like full-time jobs. Like we didn't have.
Stepping out into the real world.
We were stepping out into the real world and we're like, okay. The first hurdle we encountered was that John didn't have a full-time salary. So, because again, he was still in college and you have to make a certain amount to be able to sponsor someone. So we were very privileged to have the love and support from our families, both his side and my side. And his dad actually was my sponsor. So being a sponsor means that you're taking on full legal responsibility for this person.
Right.
So I mean, even a sponsor could end up going to jail if they are not compliant within the process. So it's heavy stuff. So not anyone will be willing to be legally responsible for a whole other person, Right. So that is a big thing to think about. A sponsor the sponsor has certain requirements that they have to meet, and if they don't meet those, they're unable to sponsor someone. Also, you can be sponsored through an employer, and this varies as well. There's other layers that go into this, but for example, my brother right now, I became a U.S. citizen last year. So when you become a U.S. citizen, you can petition for your relatives as well. But there's a but here. For your parents, the process is easier because they're my parents. So for you to have a little bit of perspective, I petitioned for my parents this year, and their waiting time is going to be 2 to 3 years. And to some, it's like, oh, yeah, that's a lot of time. Yeah, it's a lot of time. However, for siblings over the age of 21, the waiting time is 15 to 20 years.
Wow.
So when the lawyer tells us, I'm like, oh. Immediately, first thing I did was cry. I'm like, man, this sucks. Because I didn't think it was going to be that long of a time. Right. And there's a lot behind how we were able to find my brother to be sponsored through an employer. There's a lot of prayer, a lot of faith. My mom was like, we're going to find a way, we're going to find. And she started praying, and then one thing led to the other, and the Lord provided a way for him to do it through this employer. And that there's so many layers that go into that as well. But now he's going to be able to immigrate. Right now he's in the process, which the process also, the timelines that you're given aren't always promised.
Yeah, I figured that.
Because, for example, for my brother, within the timeline, right, that he was given is like, oh yeah, it's going to be 1 to 2 years. The problem is that they only have a specific number of visas through employers that are approved, and they met their number. My brother was not a part of that. So another hurdle, which was disappointing. And we're like, oh man, it's going to be another 1 to 2 years on top of that,
Yeah, that's a lot. Can I ask a question? Is that something where any employer has that ability to do that, or does it look like certain?
It's a whole
because you said there's a salary.
Thing. There is a salary. The employer really has to go through this set of requirements and things for them to be able to petition for people. Okay. So it's a whole process as well. I do know someone that is that they have their own business, and they're trying to make these kinds of visas more available, because there's not a lot. Right. There's not a lot. So the fact that my brother, we know the amount of privilege that comes with that and the blessing and opportunity that it is to be able to do that, you know? So that is just sponsors. I've only talked about one part of getting in line. So this is just the sponsors part, right?
Right.
Now, you also need lawyers, and lawyers are expensive.
Oh yeah.
They are very, very expensive. You not only need a lawyer, which I mentioned before, in the country you are trying to immigrate to, but your country of origin.
Yeah, I didn't know that part.
Yes. Yeah. So you need 2 lawyers, basically. And that is expensive. It adds up. Yeah. And you need that because within the process, you're asked for hundreds of things, different things, documents, birth certificates, which makes sense, but it is lengthy, and there's a lot of lingo and language that I truly don't understand, neither John, so it's very needed. And there's people that have done it without lawyers. I'm like, hey, hats off to you.
Yeah.
You having to sit through that. And, you know, it's obviously worth it, but also think about the time investment. If going to the DMV is a pain.
Yeah, exactly. Oh
a pain. Gosh. Imagine having to gather, you know, hundreds and go through hundreds of like pages of information, you know? So that is another piece of getting in line. Also, naming that the process, and this is something that surprises a lot of people when I share this, the process is different depending on your country of origin. So for those of us in Latin America and Africa,
right,
it looks different from someone petitioning from Europe. The waiting times are less usually. And there's many reasons for this. But yeah, that is also something important for you to be aware of, the country of origin. And me being from Honduras also does affect. Like, I remember my lawyer saying, yeah, like, there's this other requirements for people that are from Honduras because there has been more undocumented immigration. There's more barriers that they try to put and make it harder for people to do it the legal pathway. And the financial piece, the finances, you need thousands of dollars,
right? Which
for someone who has a U.S. salary, it's hard, you know. So imagine people in countries like, and I can speak for mine, countries that, like mine, where over 60% of the population is below the poverty line. Like, they don't have that. They don't have access to that kind of money. And if it's hard for us here, I mean, I can't come up with with thousands of dollars right now, you know, just for.
It's hard out here.
We were also very, very fortunate with John to have our families financially pitch in with this. Like, we couldn't do it alone. For both my process and my brothers, like the opportunity, which you're hearing all these hardships, but also I want to highlight the beauty of it. Like, it made John and I grow closer, his family, my family. Like, we're all going through this.
Yeah.
We're all crying through this. We're all
waiting.
The waiting that you have to do, because you're given timelines, but they tell you those are not promised.
Yeah.
That those are not promised. Well, to the point that I can share with you all, in 2017, John and I got engaged earlier that year. We petitioned, and we were told, oh, you should have your visa, your fiance visa, like around August or September. And we're like, okay, let's give ourselves an extra month, you know, and let's set the date for October 21st.
Generous.
Yes, you know, being generous, that way I can fly into the U.S. with everything. And we're planning a wedding, right? So I'm having this immigration piece of like doing all the things that goes into like medical exams to be able to enter into like all the things that come with that, and the stress of
a wedding.
Yeah. And I made it one day before my wedding.
Oh my gosh.
We got married on a Saturday, October 21st, 2017. And I got in Friday at 2 a.m. And it was a miracle of God. We actually had, if it wasn't for the involvement of one of John's family members that worked within like the U.S. government and had access to, I wouldn't have made it. We would have had to cancel our wedding, and like not cancel, but like moved it to God knows when.
Goodness.
So, you know, those are some of the pieces that go into like timeline.
Right.
And then,
then obviously after you got to the States, I mean, you had mentioned before about the green card and being a lawful citizen. Like, what is that process like?
Yeah. Good question. Because then you would assume like, okay, well, you moved, you start looking for a job, right? When you move to a city here, you're like, okay, either you move because of a job or you're looking for a job, and I'm going to start my life. Well, legally, through my process, because this varies, again, it's different, but my process, you have to wait to get your red card, which is your employment card, and your green card. And that took 8 months. Man. So what that meant practically, so think about this. If you were in this position, you had just moved to a new country, you're going through this process. It took 8 months for me to be able to legally find a job to drive. I couldn't drive because without your green card, you can't apply for your social security number. Without your social security number, you can't apply for a driver's license. So that meant
domino effect.
Being at home, for 8 months without being able to do and work and bring, just more income to our family, which thankfully, again, the blessing of the Lord, John had a job that was able to sustain the both of us. But there's people that's not a reality for,
What happens if I was going to say, what happens if you're by yourself? I mean, is that the same situation? Exactly. I know you said there's different statuses.
There is. But yeah, that is a situation.
Wow.
You have your sponsor basically becomes liable for you and to be able to provide for you as well.
Right.
So if your sponsor's not able to do that, like you're not going to be able to be here. So then you can start, as I'm explaining all of this, I hope you start seeing that usually those who are able to immigrate, and I fall into this category, have to have a certain amount of access to money, a certain amount of access to contacts here within the U.S. and in your home country. And that it is not available for everyone.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's like very clear, that you can see like,
like the limitations
that go into it. It's really wild. And also I want to say, because my process doing this through the fiancé visa is the easiest one. So imagine, I just shared all of those things, all of those hurdles, all of the time pieces that go into it.
Right.
Mine is the easiest. From all the processes within like immigrating, I know I have friends who have been in this process for over 10 years and still just have their green card. And then there's others that are waiting for that.
Right.
There's others that it took them 15 or 20 years to get to be able to apply for citizenship. So yes, all of that, I hope it like helps bring perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And didn't you say that, like, we had talked about this before, but you said something about if they deny you, then you have to wait even more.
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely. Yes.
You're not guaranteed. That's the tough part.
The tough part is that even like the filing fees are non-refundable. So you file, like, say one of the parts or documents that you need, you pay those $300 for that piece of paper, but that's not a guarantee that that's going to be approved. So you do all of this in hopes that you get approved.
Right.
And there are people that get denied. And then in some cases, they give you a specific time until when you can apply again. For some people, that may look like, okay, you're not able to apply until 5 years from now. So say you get told no, you have to wait 5 years to be able to just apply again for the possibility of being told no again.
So
yes.
Is it something that, like, if you're, being from Honduras, like, is it something where you almost have to like, okay, as a child, you plan for college, right?
Yeah.
Is it something that kind of is in that same mindset of like people at a younger age, knowing how long the process is, go ahead and start thinking about it?
No.
Or it's just one of those things that
it's one of those, again, and I come from a context where in my home country, I was considered someone who had more means, and even within, like, I was able to go to college. That just like going to college in my home country, you guys, it's a big deal. It's a big deal because a lot of people start, but financially are unable to.
Yeah.
And thankfully, by that point, a part of my story, my dad was able to just be able to financially support my siblings and I. So I'm first generation college, graduate within our family, which is a big deal. But anyway, all that to say, like, even us who had more access to things had no clue that this, you don't know what you don't know until you have to go through it, until you have to experience it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what it is. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, yeah, just the waiting timeline and all of that on top of the stress.
Oh yeah.
It just, wow. And I feel like I was telling Marlen this earlier. I feel like it almost is like the process of itself is overwhelming, obviously,
Yeah.
but there's like milestones
Absolutely.
within the process. So it almost feels like, okay, you jumped through one hoop, great, but then you have like 5 other hoops.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I mean, I'm sure that's what it felt like at times.
Oh, no. To the point when the day that I became a citizen and I had they give you a certificate, like to go apply for your passport, your U.S. passport.
Yeah.
I cried of relief,
Right.
of saying, oof, I'm done.
Yeah.
And that was me exhausted after like this, like, and I haven't even shared just the things. I was undocumented for a little part of it because of policies that happened a couple of years ago that was crazy. Anyway,
Man.
things that affected it. I didn't even go into all of that, but
Right.
yes, the amount of relief and 5 years. And that day, there were 30 of us being in the oath ceremony, been sworn in. And I asked them, like, it super diverse from all, like, there was people from Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Europe, all over. And most of them had been waiting for that day for 20 years. I'm like, if I felt like that for 5 years, I was just sobbing. I was like, I just looked at John, my husband, and I was like, babe, we did it. Like, this it's crazy. It was more the relief than anything, you know, because you know what that means. You know, the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of frustration, the amount of heartbreak, the amount of like, not yet, that went into that, the patience that was, you were tested and tested again and again.
Goodness.
And the relief that just like left my body.
Yeah.
But then I geared into it again because then now I'm still helping my parents now going through the process. So I'm still doing all of that just now for my parents.
Right.
And now helping my brother too with his employer.
Do you feel like after you've gone through it, it helps with, your brother and your parents? Like, you feel a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more like...
Oh, absolutely. So also,
that's the other thing is, like, you don't know who to trust. Like, with the lawyers and, I mean...
Yeah, and everyone has a different experience, again.
Yeah.
Because some have had an easier experience. Others have had, like, horror stories. I could share horror stories.
Man, yeah.
But our process... I also have an older sister who also immigrated in the same way. She also married someone from here, and... because I was the first one, the trailblazer, to say, like, they learned from our experience. And it's like, okay, now we know.
Right.
We're not going to do this, or we're going to do this, or this worked great, this didn't work great.
Yeah.
We actually had the same lawyer, which is really cool. So, and to this day, we have the same lawyer for my parents. So, yeah, it's a whole thing. So next time you hear getting in line, you have a better understanding of what that means. Yeah. It's a short phrase, but believe me, for those of us who have immigrated, who are immigrants, that brings a lot of weight. You know, comes with a lot of things that many people don't know what it really means.
No, I think that's so, so good. And I hope you guys are taking away as much as I've taken away this episode. It is crucial for us to be talking about these things.
Yeah.
It's not, something that I think, like we mentioned before, is as mentioned as it needs to be.
Yeah.
But I mean, literally, kudos to you for doing this and doing it with grace and humility. I know for sure. If you guys are walking through this with someone, I mean, I hope this encourages you as well. And just the amount of, like you said, stress, time, heartbreak, resilience that it takes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's honorable. So I just hope that you guys out there were able to, get a little bit more educated, but also just be able to hear Marlen's side and what she's had to go through and what she's gone through to help you know, if anyone else is in that boat as well. But
and I just want to say thank you for listening if you've made it this far in the episode, because it means a lot for me when people really listen and lean in and make space to hold my story, which is not easy, believe me. Before we recorded this, I was like, okay, here we go. But also, like, now I'm so glad that I did it, because I really hope that you learned something new, and that, you know, this allows you to see it from a different perspective that maybe you hadn't heard, you know, before. So
so good. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in and listening. Make sure you check out all of our other episodes beforehand, and we will see you on the other side.
Yes, see you.
All right, have a good one.
Have a good one.